Here are two strange mysteries related to the American Civil War that have recently been solved. Mystery 2. Researchers have announced that they've solved one of the most long-standing mysteries of the American Civil War, what caused the unexplained downing of the H.L. Hunley. This was the first combat submarine in history known to have sunk an enemy warship. The Confederate vessel famously disappeared, along with all its crew, on the 17th of February 1864, immediately after destroying the Union's USS Housatonic in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. The Hunley's wreck was not discovered until 1995 and raised from the seabed 5 years later. The skeletons of its 8-man crew were still poised at their stations and showing no sign of attempting to escape. Since then, archaeologists and conservationists have closely examined the submarine, now kept at Clemson University Restoration Institute in South Carolina, for clues as to the reasons it sank. One popular theory suggested that the crew of the Housatonic was able to shoot holes in the craft. Another, that the Hunley accidentally collided with a ship. A third theory claimed that its crew were incapacitated and possibly killed by the blast of the submarine's own torpedo. This third theory now seems the correct one, according to Rachel Lance, a biomedical engineer at Duke University, North Carolina. She believes that the pressure wave from the explosion was transmitted back into the submarine and was sufficiently large that all crew instantly perished. Lance and other scientists simulated the explosive forces that impacted the crew by blowing up a scale model they called the USS Tiny. At 1/6 the size of the Hunley, the model was submerged in a farmer's pond. The team published their findings in 2017. The Hunley was one of many submersible prototypes developed by both Union and Confederate sides during the Civil War, as each side battled for naval supremacy, according to James Delgado. The marine archaeologist and historian is a former director of maritime heritage at the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and now vice president of the Search Marine Archaeology firm based in Florida. The 12-metre-long Hunley submarine was constructed from sheets of high-tensile boiler iron, connected by rivets hammered flush with the exterior to minimise drag. The crew would use geared hand cranks to power the innovative craft and sit hunched on a bench along the central crankshaft. The vessel's only weapon was a black gunpowder-filled copper cylinder, roughly the size of a beer keg, according to Lance. This was attached to a 6.7-metre pole mounted on the submarine's bow. In 2013, researchers realised that the submarine was still attached to the explosive charge when it detonated. This supported the theory that the explosion from this cylinder had impacted the Hunley's own crew. They discovered copper ribbons from the charge embedded in the pole. These indicated that the torpedo was not originally designed to be detached from the submarine, but was intended simply to be rammed directly into an enemy ship. To measure the effect of the explosion, Lance and the other scientists blasted the Tiny with increasing quantities of black powder charges, using sensors to gain the peak pressure impacting the interior of the mini-submarine. Lance then calculated a scaling up of the blast to match that which had struck the crew of the Hunley, which was constructed with a much thinner hull than modern submarines. Another expert, Robert Salzer, studies blast injury biomechanics at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. He claims that the blast may have indirectly killed the crew by knocking them unconscious and triggering the sinking of the craft. However, he doubts that the effects were instantaneous. He points out that the bleeding and trauma created by excessive pressure on the lungs, a condition known as blast lung, is not immediately lethal in itself. Lance states that to be certain about the blast strength, a full-scale recreation would need to be done. She says the research findings suggest that the crew would have had a 16% chance of survival based only on their probable lung trauma. The absence of autopsies, which would have needed to be performed immediately after the Hunley's sinking, makes it impossible to determine a precise cause of their loss of life. By the night of the Hunley's final mission, the vessel had already sunk twice during training at the cost of 13 men's lives. These included that of Horace Lawson Hunley, a wealthy lawyer who gave his name and financial support to the development of the sub and had decided to commandeer it during a routine exercise. According to Delgado, perceptions of the craft as a failed experiment are unfair. The submarine was state-of-the-art nautical engineering for its time, and its Pyrrhic victory boosted the spirits of the Confederate side following a string of battlefield defeats. He says there was nothing primitive about the Hunley's technology for that time. Mystery 1. John Potter claimed that over 30 years ago, as a teenager, he was browsing for collectibles at a yard sale in South Georgia when he came across what seemed a mind-blowing image. An old picture frame contained a weathered photograph showing on one side the dark silhouette of a figure resembling a soldier with a long boxy structure just discernible in the background. Potter related that he didn't have the $175 its seller in Waycross was asking for the photograph, which was a hazy image further marred by stains from water or chemicals. He also recalled reading a written clue to identifying the image on the back of the frame. The inscription said CSS Georgia. Potter claimed that he then knew exactly what the image was and that it belonged in a museum. However, the only evidence he retained of the mystery image were photographs he had snapped of the original to show to his historian friends back in Savannah. Civil War experts commented that the image, if authenticated, would be the only known photograph of the CSS Georgia. This was an armoured Confederate warship that had been scuttled by its own crew in 1864 when General Sherman's Union troops captured Savannah. Military historians still have many questions about the sunken ironclad, and they believe the original photo may help them find answers. However, the photograph became just as much a mystery as the CSS Georgia because after news of its existence, nobody saw it again over decades. The ship's sunken wreck was only partially salvaged, then left virtually untouched for over a century for fear of damaging what remained. By military standards, the CSS Georgia was a failed prototype, never firing a shot in battle. The Civil War saw the inception of the era of armoured warships. In Savannah, the Ladies' Gunboat Association had raised $115,000 to build a sturdy warship to protect the city. But the engines of the 120-foot-long CSS Georgia were proven ineffectual in propelling its 1,200-ton body against river currents. It remained anchored off Fort Jackson as a floating gun battery before being scuttled in December 1864. Until Potter's apparent find, no photographs of the ironclad had been confirmed, nor blueprints or construction plans ever located. Several artists sketch renderings of the CSS Georgia, but the images differ in their details. Experts were fairly convinced that if the image Potter found in the 1980s could be authenticated, it was probably the CSS Georgia. Archival information dug up indicated that the shape in the photo conformed with known features of the ironclad's unique design, namely an armoured casemate covering the ship's entire deck with the sides sloped at 45-degree angles. In 1986, Potter donated his photograph of the original image to the Georgia Historical Society. He stated that he tried unsuccessfully to reconnect with the photo's owner, who had moved away from Waycross. A couple of years on, Potter reported receiving a letter from a relative of the original photo's owner. He said the letter, which he had not kept, claimed the original photograph had been gifted to the Savannah History Museum. However, the museum's then curator and director said he had never seen a photograph of any Confederate ironclad during his tenure, and that if he had thought that the image was the CSS Georgia, he would have moved mountains to ensure the museum got it. In 2012, the US Army Corps of Engineers budgeted $14 million to raise the Confederate warship's wreckage from the bottom of the Savannah River. A 64 square feet section was salvaged and over 1,000 artefacts recovered. 3 years later, the Corps spread the word via its website and through social media that it was seeking the original photograph of the ironclad, hoping that the owner may be storing other relics related to the ship. This prompted the truth to finally come out about the mysterious image that had stymied historians and experts for 3 decades. In 2015, John Potter decided to clear the record and declare his photo a fake. As a teenager, Potter and his younger brother Jeffrey built small models of the CSS Georgia for an 8mm movie they were shooting at home. All credit due, they based the model's design partly on their grandfather's recollections of details passed down by word of mouth through family generations, and also on an illustration of the ironclad they found on a postcard. Jeffrey, wearing a coat and straw hat, posed out on a marsh carrying a cane fishing pole, and Potter snapped the shot. Taking another photo of his small model ship, he glued the boat's image onto the photo of his brother, then dirtied and stained the finished product. He found an old picture frame, damaged it a bit more, and placed the photo in it. The weird bit is that he then drove 120 miles to a yard sale in Waycross, Georgia, where he took the Polaroid shot of it. He wanted at least that part of his story to be true. The old frame now contains a photo of Potter's deceased pet pug. He had completely forgotten about the photo until he recently saw it on the Army Corps website, so decided to put the matter to rest. He claimed that as he had used glue to age his photo, it was shredded when he removed it from the frame. Potter has never made any money from his teenage hoax and was a bit shocked that it had been taken seriously. It does show great skills at a young age. As one expert commented, if the photo isn't authentic, it's an extremely good fake.